students and all the participants. I, Richa Suri Rastogi, on behalf of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, extend a warm welcome to all of you in the panel discussion on Union Budget 2022-23, organized by the Economic Society under the aegis of Internal Quality Assurance Cell. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome our eminent panelists for today's session, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bangalore, and Professor Ram Singh, Professor at the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. I'm honored to have you with us today, and thank you to have agreed to give us your valuable time. I'm also honored and privileged to warmly welcome Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, Principal Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, University of Delhi, and thank him for gracing the occasion. It is the vision of our dynamic principal, sir, to go beyond the classroom mode of teaching that encourages us to organize such events. Now I invite Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha to welcome our speakers and say a few words. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Richa Suri. Honorable Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor, B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, Bangalore, and Honorable Professor Ram Singh, Professor, Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University, Dr. Vinita Tuli, Coordinator IQAC, Dr. Richa Suri, Coordinator of Economics Department, Dr. Apala Naidu, in charge of FIC and Economics Association, other colleagues, and my dear student. On behalf of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College and our faculty and students, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome Professor Bhanumurthy and Professor Ram Singh in this panel discussion on Union Budget. I am very thankful and grateful to both the speakers that they have given their valuable time to deliver their lecture and for this discussion. I think in this time, it is very necessary to understand Union Budget of this year for the economic development and for the country and for the youngsters also. So once again, I welcome both the speakers. I am very happy that economics department is organizing these kind of workshops, seminars, and discussions on a regular basis, because I believe that beyond classroom, the students can learn many things in these programs. So thank you so much for organizing these kind of programs, Dr. Richa Suri and Dr. Apala Naidu. My best wishes to all the organizers. Thank you so much. Once again, I welcome all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for your motivating words. Proceeding further. Our Honorable Finance Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, presented the second paperless Union Budget 2022-23 in the Parliament on 1st February 2022. And since then, there is a lot of buzz happening in and around the Union Budget. While presenting the Union Budget, Finance Minister emphasized that Union Budget 2022-23 will lay the foundation for India's economic growth and expansion for the next 25 years. Through this webinar, we aim to know the highlights, benefits, drawbacks, key changes, the key sectors that have been impacted, and basically to get an overview and analysis of this budget. It is my pleasure and honor now to introduce our first panelist for today, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Professor Bhanumurthy is the first Vice Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bangalore. He is currently on leave from National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, where he was a professor since 2009. Prior to this, he's worked at the Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. Professor Bhanumurthy has done his PhD in economics from Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. He did his post-graduation and MPhil in economics from the University of Hyderabad. His research areas are macro monetary economics, fiscal policy, international money and finance, macroeconomic modeling, and development economics. In these areas, he has authored over 70 research papers and 5 books. He has served on over 22 government committees constituted by the Finance Ministry, Ministry of Statistics, Ministry of Rural Development, Niti Aayog, RBI, Government of Karnataka, among others. Professor Bhanumurthy has been the Secretary of the Indian Econometric Society since 2006 and also the Managing Trustee of Indian Economic Association Trust for Research and Development since 2010. He has received the prestigious Mahalanobis Memorial Medal Award for the year 2014 for his outstanding contributions to the field of quantitative economics in India and V.K.R.V. Rao Prize in Social Sciences for the year 2015 for high quality research and for significant contributions to social science research in India. Sir, we had the privilege to hear from you last year as well, and we are equally thrilled and honored to have you with us again. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time. So all the participants are hereby requested to put their questions in the chat box, and my colleague Dr. Appara Sinha will try to take as many of them as possible after the session. So without much further ado, I invite Professor Bhanumurthy to deliver the first session for today. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richa. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Well, I'd like to thank ARSD College for inviting me to this union budget discussion. And I'm also happy that I've been sharing this panel discussion with my good friend, Professor Singh from Delhi School of Economics. And I would like to thank Professor Jha, Principal of the college, and Dr. Vinita, and my good friend Appal Naidu, and Dr. Appara Sinha. I think Dr. Appara Sinha invited me a couple of times, but I could not join in the previous meetings. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for this important event. In terms of union budget, I think so much has been written and spoken about the union budget for the past 15 days. And I think everybody has highlighted one important aspect, that the budget has actually focused heavily on capital expenditure, and that goes very well for recovery of the Indian economy, which has already set in the second half of the current financial year. Despite the third wave, we are expecting that the Indian economy to grow at about 9%, and for the next year, as RBI predicted, so we should be somewhere close to 7.5 to 8% for the next year. So in that sense, I think the policies that has been initiated by the government of India, some of the state governments, and I think one should not really forget the policies initiated by the Reserve Bank of India. So all these, policy institutions, I think they have really helped Indian economy to recover much faster than many of us have expected, and in fact much faster than many other countries in the world, without much side effects. I must say, I would like to come to that a little later. One of the side effects of this kind of shocks, and especially when you're trying to come out of the shock, is either you might be experiencing a kind of a runaway inflation that we experienced in the post-global financial crisis, and also many of the advanced countries are actually facing right now. I think the students, those who are here, you may want to know that the United States is experiencing an inflation which is the highest in the last 4 decades. I think they have experienced in early 1980s, when there was a very severe condition of stagflation in the United States, and I think a similar inflationary conditions that they are experiencing. Are other side effect would be that you'll have a runaway current account deficit or the kind of fiscal deficit that the advanced countries are having. So India, in that sense, it looks like we have learned a lot of lessons in the global financial crisis. I think what we have done in the recent episode is that I think it seems to be very, very pragmatic. Of course, there are many misses in a sense in terms of reducing allocation to the social sector. All those things will come a little later. But by and large, I think we seem to have done much better compared to what we used to do in the past, and also what other countries are actually doing right now since last 2 years. I would like to see that the recent budget is more of a continuation of what happened last year, where I'm sure some of you remember, even in the last year budget, the finance minister has actually heavily focused on capital expenditure, and whatever the number that we have available right now, I think a large part of the capital expenditure allocation seems to have actually happened in the last 1 year. So of course there are still some more expenditures need to be made, but otherwise I would like to say that the recent budget is more of a continuation of the last year budget. And they reiterated their focus on government capital expenditure. Those who understand simple macroeconomic identity, where your output is basically a summation of private consumption, government consumption, government investment, and the private investment, and then the trade component, that is y equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m. So if you look at all those, because of the COVID-19, most of the components are actually doing extremely very poor, and what is left is it's only the government. Out of the three engines that we talk about, government is the only engine that was left to really perform, and I think the government has done extremely well in terms of focusing on capital expenditure. What is the logic behind it? Why should the government need to focus heavily on capital expenditure and not really much on the revenue expenditure? So I think that is what is very important for all of us to understand. And those who think that governments have not done much, I would like to suggest to look at the general government deficit. General government, when I say central government plus state governments, the general government deficits for the past 3 years, including for the coming year, if you look at, I think we are going to see a double-digit fiscal deficit for the third consecutive year. Okay, we have seen somewhere close to 14 or 14.5% fiscal deficit in the COVID period, that is 2021, and 21-22 also we have seen somewhere close to 11%, and again for 22-23. We should be experiencing a fiscal deficit of somewhere close to 10.5 to 11%. So in a sense, almost 35% fiscal deficit in the last 3 years. And I think it is, if anybody say that it is very less, I think it's very important for us to relook at it. 35% support for the government in the last 3 years is something very, very substantial. And I'm sure that will have very positive impact on the Indian economy. So the logic behind capital expenditure, I think that's one. It's very, very important, and I would like to share that. I don't know whether I have shared in the last year, but I would like to say that the reason for focusing on capital expenditure is that the capital expenditure will have a larger multiplier effect on the economy, not only by its own, but also it will have a crowding in impact on the private investment. I think this is the logic that has been utilized. I have seen some articles saying that there is no basis, but I think that is not correct. In fact, the government budget document very clearly mentions that the capital expenditure multiplier is 2.45. That means if you are spending 100 rupees on the government capital expenditure, you should be getting a return of 245 rupees in terms of the GDP. That is what we understand when we say fiscal multiplier. But if you look at the revenue deficit or revenue expenditure, the multiplier is less than 1. That means if you're spending 100 rupees on the revenue expenditure, you're actually getting a return of less than 100 rupees. And whatever the difference between that GDP as well as the revenue expenditure, whether it can lead to inflation or it could be leakage in the economy, in that Keynesian identity, the leakage is nothing but your imports. Okay, so either it can create additional pressure on the prices in the domestic economy, or you end up in importing more resources, more commodities from the external world. So that is the reason why there is a heavy focus on capital expenditure, because it has a larger fiscal multiplier. So this 2.45 fiscal multiplier for capital expenditure, I'm happy to say that this is my number, and this is the one which I published in 2013 with the title Fiscal Multipliers for India. So I think that seems to have really played a major role in government's decision to focus on capital expenditure. In fact, it is the crux of the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, which has been adopted in India since 2003, both by the center as well as the state government. So the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, somehow there is a misconception that FRBM Act or fiscal consolidation is actually fiscal compression. So it is not really true. FRBM Act or the fiscal consolidation is not a fiscal compression mechanism. Rather, it is an expenditure switching mechanism, expenditure switching from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure. So the intrinsically what's happening is, by doing that, because of the larger multiplier from the capital expenditure, you should have a larger impact on the real GDP growth, while it will have a less impact on the inflationary pressure. So that is what is Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. I would like to repeat again, sorry. FRBM Act is not a fiscal compression mechanism. It is basically expenditure switching mechanism from consumption to capital expenditure. So I've been explaining this mechanism for quite some time, and the whole recovery process that we are talking about right now, the whole transmission mechanism from one expenditure to another expenditure is completely different from what we read in some of the commentary. In my view, the transmission mechanism that the government has adopted right now, which is consistent with the FRBM Act, is that increasing the capital expenditure, government capital expenditure, will lead to a larger private investment, and together will have larger impact on the GDP growth, and then which will in turn will have larger impact on the tax revenues or the non-tax revenues, and provide more resources for the revenue expenditure. So the transmission mechanism is actually from capital expenditure to revenue expenditure. In between, the private investment and GDP growth play a major role. So in that sense, I'm personally happy that the budget has actually adopted or continue to adopt the fiscal expenditure switching mechanism since last year. So the reason why that is very important, I think the youngsters should really know, it is not the fiscal deficit of this current year or the revenue deficit of the current year matters much for medium-term fiscal plan. It is the public debt to GDP ratio. In fact, the outstanding liability that we talk about, all of you should know that as per the FRBM Act, the general government public debt to GDP ratio should come down to 60%. Okay, right now, instead of coming down, we have seen the general government public debt actually, rather the outstanding liabilities actually went up to something like 93%. Okay, now I think that is going to create a large fiscal crisis in the medium term. So it is very important for the governments, both center as well as states, to focus on the public debt to GDP ratio from now on, so that you will have a less fiscal pressure in the medium term. and somebody can really ask what is wrong with public debt to GDP ratio going to 100% or 120% or 150%. But I think the servicing of that public debt becomes extremely important. If you look at the budget document, between 2 years, between 2019-20 and 2021, the interest payment by the central government alone has increased by 3.2 lakh crore. Imagine, I'm talking about 3.2 lakh crore, which needs to be financed through tax or non-tax sources or borrowing. And imagine that is the pressure that interest payments can put on other expenditure. What I'm trying to say is that the increase in the interest payments actually can crowd out expenditures on the social sector, other relevant social sector, as well as public investment targets. So I think it's very important for all of us to keep in mind that medium-term public debt targeting becomes very, very crucial. So I was also hoping that the budget can prepare a medium-term fiscal roadmap. Unfortunately, for the second consecutive year, they have not really come out with any kind of a fiscal roadmap. As I said, I'm not really much worried for the current year, but going forward, I think 3 or 4 years down the line, what would be my fiscal condition? I think that's very crucial for not only for for the growth, but also for private investments and also for other expenditure plans. So that was completely missing, which I thought that will have repercussions on the medium-term growth plans. The other thing is there are some apprehensions about whether the budget will become inflationary. I think that is something that many people felt, that the budget can become inflationary. In fact, again, if anybody read the newspaper, the last reading on the CPI inflation is just about 6% or 6.01%. So everybody felt that India is going to face a kind of inflationary pressure. But I think if you look at the RBI's forecast for the past 1 year, I think we need to believe the RBI when they say that inflation is going to come down in the coming months. So, and it's largely because of the kind of prudent fiscal policies that is being adopted by the central government, as well as the policies adopted by the RBI. I think we still will be within that 6%, the upper band as part of our monetary policy committee framework. So I don't think that this budget is going to be inflationary. And in fact, I would say that the budget is going to be expansionary in terms of the growth. So one should really feel safe about the outcome of the budget. And anybody believes that the crowding in is not happening, the private investments are not really coming up, I think they need to look at the recent GDP data released by the National Statistical Office, that the investment rate for the current year, that is 21-22, is actually touched 36%, which is something very close to the pre-global financial crisis. In fact, in the pre-global financial crisis, the investment rate was somewhere close to 38%. Right now, in the current year itself, we have seen the investment rate actually coming back from 26% 5 years down, 5 years compared to 5 years back. Right now, we are actually seeing the investment rate of 36%. So there is a momentum in terms of the investments, and I think the proposal that is being laid out in the budget will actually see that the private investments, the overall investment rate would go up to 38 or 39% in the next year. And there are a lot of criticism about the social sector expenditure. I think I have a slightly different take on this. Yes, I think the crucial sectors like education and health are certainly needed, warranted much more than what the government has done. But I think it also seems to be that some of the responsibilities seems to have been transferred to the states. I think the states also need to spend more, resources on the health and education, because a large part of that are actually state subject, and also there is an increased devolution from center to states since the 14th Finance Commission period. All of you know that the devolution has been increased by 10 percentage points from 32 to 42. Now it is actually 41. So that itself should give more. One needs to understand that when the center is transferring 10 percentage of devolution from center to states, that means that level, that much responsibility also need to be transferred to the state governments. I think one needs to really keep that in mind. And however, as I said in the beginning, I think the center should have done much more than what they have done in the health and education sector. But the rest of the sectors, I felt that some of them are more of what automatic stabilizers. I don't know how many of you understand what you mean by automatic stabilizer. MGNREG is more of an automatic stabilizer. That is one major automatic stabilizer that we have as part of the public policy. Now, when the economy is recovering, in a big way, you don't really need that level of automatic stabilizer. Okay, but if you look at the history of MGNREGs for the past 15 years or 16 years, so since it's a demand-driven program, we have seen that as and when there is a need for additional demands, the government of the day actually increased the allocation, and it has been provided more resources to the schemes like MGNREGs. But there are many other schemes. I do believe that there is a need for a sunset clause for most of the programs. For example, housing schemes. The slogan itself will say that housing for all by 2022. Okay, so if you look at the data, many states actually exhausted even the waiting list under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, whether it is in urban or whether it is in rural. Especially in rural, I know very well. Some of the states are actually exhausted the waiting list also. So there is no further allocation to the states who has already completed the target. So there are many schemes like that which need not be provided resources every year. So in that sense, I think every year increasing allocation to the social sector by 10%, certainly not the way. But wherever there is a need, I think there is a I'm sure the government would really come up in terms of more allocation. I'll take 2 more minutes to really point one, aspect which I felt little disappointing from the budget, especially from the growth perspective or the employment perspective, is a continuation of these customs, duties on many commodities. I don't know whether it is to reflect the Atmanirbhar Bharat Pact, the slogan, but if those who have heard Finance Minister's speech, second half was completely on the customs lines. How many commodities are brought in. There are so many nitty-gritties that have been really spoken about, but I thought that those kind of measures are really not going to support the growth process. Economists like Professor Arvind Pankaria, who worked in this government, has actually raising this issue that continuation of the customs or the import duties are not going to help the Indian economy to really achieve the 5 trillion economy that we're talking about. So I think the students should really keep in mind, biggest reforms happened on the trade sector since 1991 is not on the export side, it is more on the import side. Okay, so the import duties, which was something like 300 or 400% in 1991, have been brought down to less than 10%. Okay, but unfortunately, if you look at in the last 2 years, what we are seeing is some kind of a reversal of that policy. Right now, we are seeing more commodities coming under the customs lines, and the rates are also increasing. In fact, there was one document that was missing in the overall budget documents. I don't know how many of you seen the physical budget documents. In 90s, there used to be a very bulky document which used to be called customs notifications. Okay, and over a period of time, that document was completely removed from the budgets. Now, again, since last year, we are seeing that the document is coming back as part of the budget documents. So I think that is something I felt was not really, rather it is going to have some dent on the economic prospects. And again, I want to reiterate that that import substitution policy doesn't really go well for aspiring nation like ours, for a simple reason that exports are import dependent. Okay, it is more of an import-led export growth hypothesis that holds good for Indian economy, especially in the manufacturing sector. And we know the role of manufacturing sector in terms of the growth and also in terms of its employment prospects. So I think what is important is we need to expand the share of manufacturing, which is right now at 15-16%. And I think we need to really aspire to expand the manufacturing share to 25%. Then only I think we'll be in a position to really expand the employment opportunity. So for that, I think it is necessary for us to really, relook at this whole, the import duty that we are talking about. So I think that was one thing that I thought was not really a good policy for the long term. And another small thing that I thought I will raise it and then I will stop. If you look at the budget deficit and fiscal deficit, all of you know that budget is more of the forecast. All the numbers that you see in the budget documents are forecasted. Okay, it's basically the forecasted numbers. But then at the end, you will see that when after the 1 year, you will see the revised estimate. Then you will also see that there's the final estimates. But then if you look at, there's a huge discrepancy, or there will be little discrepancy sometimes, but sometimes huge discrepancy also between what is budgeted and what is actual. And if you look at this, one important item in the budget estimation, which creates this kind of discrepancy, in public finance nomenclature, we call it as fiscal marksmanship. Okay, fiscal marksmanship is that how close are your forecast to the actual? I think that is what is called fiscal marksmanship. The one reason why we don't do well in terms of the fiscal marksmanship is our assumption on the disinvestment targets. Okay, so the disinvestment target is one thing which creates huge discrepancy between the actual and the forecasted. And if you look at the last year, the government assumed 1.75 lakh crore under the disinvestment, but when you look at the revised one, we have seen that it has been brought down to 75,000 crore or 65,000 crore. I don't remember exactly, but that is the kind of a shortfall you see in terms of the forecasted and the actual. So my proposal, I've been writing in many places. My proposal is that from now on, I think we should not be including the disinvestment estimation as part of the fiscal deficit calculation. Rather, the disinvestment should be used, or the disinvestment proceeds should be used to release some of the debt stock that we have, so that it will not. So what I'm trying to say, it should be outside the budget calculation, so that it doesn't create kind of a discrepancy that we have been seeing. So that is one proposal that I thought, which can help predictability of fiscal deficits. So with that, let me stop, and I would like to look forward. I would like to hear to my friend Ram Singh on the budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Shall I take the question answer now or after Professor Ram Singh's talk?
The way you structured, I'm fine.
I think there are no questions right now, so
Okay.
let's give time to the participants to pose their questions.
Okay.
Thank you once again for your talk. Moving ahead, I, Apra Sinha, on behalf of the Department of Economics of ARSD College, would like to welcome our next speaker, Professor Ram Singh. We are really honored to have you amongst us today, sir. Thank you once again for giving your valuable time. Dr. Ram Singh is a professor at Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, and director of Delhi School of Public Policy and Governance, Institute of Eminence, University of Delhi. He holds PhD in economics from JNU and postdoctorate in economics from Harvard University. His areas of research interests are contract theory, public economics, public-private partnerships, and law in economics. He's a recipient of Fulbright Fellowship in Economics, Commonwealth Fellowship in Economics, Erasmus Mundus Scholarship in Economics, Ronald Coase Fellowship in Institutional Economics, and Cambridge Advanced Program in Rethinking Development Economics Fellowship. His recent publications include Equilibria Under Negligence Liability, How the Standard Claims Falls Apart, in the Review of Law and Economics. He has published widely in journals like Journal of Law and Economics, Asian Journal of Law and Economics, American Law and Economics Review, and Economic and Political Weekly. He frequently writes for various newspapers. He has taught at Brown University, University of Hamburg, JNU, and has been Commonwealth Fellow at London School of Economics. This budget is really very important, and the reason why I say so, because it comes out of two pandemics and midst of the third one. So several aspects of this budget we need to unpack, and much has been discussed by Professor Bhanumurthy. So what has been the hits and the misses of this budget? So is the budget big on hopes and short on ideas? Is it visionary and progressive? With these questions in mind, I now invite Professor Ram Singh. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, for this very generous introduction, and also for making me a co-panelist with Professor Bhanumurthy, who is a very good friend. And we have had some occasions in the past also to exchange our views, but now you have put us on a formal platform. Thank you. Thank you to your department, to Dr. Suri, Dr. Naidu, your honorable principal, Dr. Jha, and other teachers and students of your college. I'm happy to be with you to share some of my views on the budget. As Dr. Sinha said, that it's an important budget. It has been presented in unusual times, almost after 2 years of pandemic, unprecedented crisis. And what is interesting is that this budget was presented a few months, less than actually 2 months before 5 states are due for election. And therefore one was expecting that the politics might dominate thinking in the Ministry of Finance. As such, one wants to see how the budget responds to economic challenges. And it turns out that it's an interesting budget on both counts. So I'm sure most people will agree that looking at the budget, it doesn't come across as a political budget. It does not look as if the politics draw decision-making or contents of the budget. What is interesting, so one would expect in conventional political economy sense that government will go big on subsidies, on tax rebates, and we saw none of that. So in that sense, it is not a political budget. It's not a budget that is determined by political expediency of short-term elections. Or we don't see that, and one should appreciate that about the budget. About the economic challenges that we are faced with, I have put together a few slides. Let me see if I can share these slides with you, and so you confirm if you can see. Right.
Yeah, it's visible.
Right, just a second. Let me. Okay, is it still visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So then we also want to know whether the budget, since budget is presented in unusual time, therefore it's natural to ask whether budget is up to the challenges that we are faced with. And the challenge as far as challenges are concerned, the primary concern generally is growth rate. For the current fiscal, however, the growth rate looks decent. The projected growth rate is 9.2%. And part of this is due to base effect. But what is also comforting is that within this fiscal year, we would have surpassed our pre-COVID levels. So one had come to struggle that, the economy took hit in the sense that the economy contracted, as Professor Bhanumurthy described. I will have to perhaps, repeat some of the things said by Professor Bhanumurthy, but that's in the interest of completeness of my talk. And in the process, I will supplement some of things said by him, and I am likely to differ on 2-3 points. But let's see how it goes. The challenges are at the moment, even though economy is projected to surpass, economy has surpassed the pre-COVID level, going by the projections. The private demand, private consumption still remains low. Private investment has picked up. Government investment picked up drastically. Private investment also has picked up, and as a result, the total investment is almost kind of all-time high or very close to that. But private final consumption expenditure remains still below. It is still below pre-COVID levels in absolute terms. In per capita terms, it's even lower, and therefore it's a matter of serious concern. Then other concerns arise on account of unemployment and rising concerns over inequalities, and price inflation is also of some concern, though not of serious concern. So on these counts, we have to ask, how has budget done something to address these issues? Statedly, budget aims to address these issues head on. And the main focus of the budget seems to be through investment strategy by pump priming economy through huge, unprecedented amount of capital expenditure. So put together between last year's budget and this year's budget, so the money being pumped in by way of capital expenditure is around 70% higher compared to pre-COVID levels. That's a really impressive increase by all counts. And if you put together the incentives provided to states, the effective projected investment is more than 10 lakh crore. So that amounts to more than 4% of GDP overall. And with such kind of investment, it's difficult not to be optimistic about things. So we have reasons to be optimistic. More at grassroots level, schemes like money pumped in Prime Minister Awas Yojana and Nal Se Jal scheme would also expectedly bear healthy fruits. So that's the growth strategy of, and it is also a strategy. From another perspective, it also means that on the issue of inflation, the government has chosen path of supply side, easing supply side constraints rather than demand management. That seems to be focus of the budget. So by pumping in so much of money in investment in infrastructure and with crowding in happening, the idea is that supply side constraints will ease up, and as a result, pressure on inflation on prices will also ease up. And it makes sense, especially when demand is low. So one can hope that there will be less, the pressure on prices is likely to ease up. It shows in several projections also. On this count, what is new about this budget? It's not, it's a kind of, it's not standard investment strategy led budget. There's an interesting application of mind. And here is my take on this point. One of the interesting features of this budget is that the states have been incentivized to not only that center has made generous provisions for infrastructure spending, but states also have been incentivized to pump in money in infrastructure. And the center has sought to achieve so, by offering credit line or grant up to 1 lakh crore on matching investment basis. So it's like, money given almost freely to states, as long as states are going to match this money and invest in infrastructure. So it gives, in economics, one of the challenges is to incentivize people to do right things. So through this process, the center has aimed to incentivize states to invest in infrastructure. The states generally have tendencies to invest less by way of capital expenditure and more by way of revenue expenditure. And as was stated by Professor Ramanurthy, the revenue expenditure multiplier is not even 1, it's less than 1. But between center and state, while we are on the issue of multiplier, if we have to ask investment by center multiplier and investment by state multiplier, the latter multiplier tends to be higher for 2 reasons. One is that the state level investment projects tend to be of smaller size. Second, they tend to deal with public facilities, public goods at local level. So on both counts, the employment intensity of the projects funded by capital expenditure by states tend to be higher. As a result, employment multiplier and multiplier for rural economy tends to be higher when the state spends compared to when center spends. When center government spends on building of airports, expressways, these constructions have a significant multiplying effect, but these are capital intensive today. Unlike 1 decade ago, most reconstruction of highways tend to be labor intensive, but technology has taken over. Labor replacing technology has taken over very fast. As far as states are concerned, on the other hand, their investment still remains labor intensive, and therefore it will be nice if this scheme works, if this incentive created for state governments, it delivers intended results. So one can hope that the employment will revive, employment opportunity, and through employment opportunity, rural income and rural demand, and through that process, private consumption will also revive. So that's these are some of the highlights of the budget. At the same time, there are concerns also. One concern is on discount itself. Since now states have been incentivized to invest money by way of capex in infrastructure, if states go for expenditure switching, meaning thereby states spend less on revenue expenditure and more on infrastructure, from long-term perspective, that will be a good thing. But from short-term perspective, it will impact earnings and thereby consumption. And it may so aggravate the issue, the concern on account of private consumption. So that would be the other concern would be that the center has given push investment made in infrastructure, budgetary provisions made for infrastructure investment. The fiscal deficit is not very high. It's not alarming. Actually, if you look at in the totality, it's not alarming at all, because most of it is going in funding of infrastructure. But in the process, it seems like the center is going to spend less on centrally sponsored schemes. If that happens, then that surely might force states to cut down on their expenditure of all counts, and that may dampen their enthusiasm to utilize this 1 lakh crore grant being offered to the states. So its execution of the schemes presented in the budget will be very important. And independently of the budget, unemployment remains our serious concern. Not now, not in last few years, but actually for last several decades, since independence actually. You look at whenever you watch movies from 70s, 60s, 80s. So unemployment as a theme, poverty, unemployment as themes, they appear in movies, in our literature. So these problems have been around us. We make progress once in a while, but we have not got very good handle over these problems. And so at the moment, unemployment level is comparable to the pre-COVID levels, but one perennial concern related to labor force participation, that remains. It's a decades-old concern. It's not a new concern, and we can't hope to solve this, address this concern in a matter of months or in a couple of years. It remains a concern. You know, there are two striking features of a low labor force participation rate in our country. And you can see from, this is the data sourced from CMI, Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy. According to CMIE, in December last year, 5.3 crore people were unemployed. And out of these unemployed, 3.5 crore were seeking work. But 1.7 crore, 70 millions were unemployed, but were not actively seeking work. So one has to wonder why people will not seek, unemployed will not actively seek work. And it may have something to do with their perception. If you are unemployed and if you are not super optimistic about the employment prospect, you may choose not to actively seek work. This problem seems to be acuter with respect to women. So this issue remains of a concern. And it is true that in short run, one can't do much on this count. And therefore, one should not blame budget if budget has not addressed this issue directly, because there are limited policy tools available. But when we combine low labor force participation with the hit taken by informal sector and micro and small and medium-sized enterprises, then together it becomes a picture of serious concern. And the low labor force participation rate in recent times and people not actively seeking employment might have, it seems like it has something to do with their feelings, their beliefs, whether they are going to get a job or not. It seems that on that count, a lot needs to be done. Similarly, there are some concerns. Agriculture has experienced a robust growth rate during last 2 years, and last year actually agriculture and government expenditure were the saving grace. That is partly true this year also, but there are some concerns that are emerging in recent times. So, data put out by private companies that specialize in fast-moving consumer goods, like companies like Hindustan Divers and other companies. This suggests that their sale is either not experiencing growth or growth rate is low. Some of the rural stress also shows up in the form of a drop in sales of tractors and two-wheelers also. So we will have to watch out for these things. And as I said, the effect of pump priming of economy through infrastructure investment will bear fruit, but it also takes time because infrastructure projects have long gestation period. It takes time before the fruits are born and enjoyed by the society as a whole. Then the final set of concerns are on account of health and education. On these counts, there is some increase in budgetary allocation. Now, we have to, as far as allocation on health is concerned, the budgetary allocation is slightly, it's decent, it's not super impressive, but we have to keep in mind that some of the spending on health, especially COVID-related, vaccination-related spending, last year, health sector saw significant increase in spending budgetary allocation for health, and that was largely on account of COVID-related concerns. Now, those concerns, given significant strides made on vaccination front, so perhaps government has taken it easy, but it's still something that we need to invest heavily. No society, no economy has become developed economy or developed society without significant investments in health and education. The problem, of course, is much deeper than shortage of funds. These two sectors, health and education, also suffer from moral hazards on the part of people who are responsible for providing health and education services. A lot also has to change in our thinking as to, so funding or lack of funding is only a part of the problem. Our work ethics also have to improve. But as long as we do not provide quality education to our kids and we do not invest in their health, then the problems of inequalities will be hard to address. The reason being that in the digital age, digital services or service sector will remain dominant sectors. We should strive to develop share of manufacturing, and so that it absorbs surplus labor from agriculture. But given the unique trajectory of our growth path, unlike in conventional textbook example, so agriculture, dominance of agriculture is followed by dominance of manufacturing. Then at very advanced stage, that services sector come to acquire dominance in economic, in its share in GDP and in employment. But in our case has been unique in the sense that we directly moved from dominance of agriculture to dominance of services in GDP, their share in GDP and also in employment. But as long as that's going to be our future, education becomes even more important, because it makes the quality of education makes significant impact on the productivity in services sector. It's true in manufacturing also, but much more so in services, especially services that will make use of big data, artificial intelligence, and information and communication technology. So that the path of reducing the other feature of digital economy is going to be that on one hand, it will offer opportunities to people who may not have wealth legacy to support them. But if they have education, they have benefited from quality of education, they can put themselves and their families on a different production possibility frontier, helping helping reduce inequalities. Related to this is the quality of our labor force. Doesn't matter which end of the spectrum of labor force you look at, except at the very top, the quality of labor in India is poor. It's well below international standards. Whether you look at at unskilled jobs, there of course quality doesn't matter that much. But wherever quality matters, semi-skilled, skilled in manufacturing, in plumbing services, our quality is a serious issue. And there, I think the budget could have made a significant difference by investing money in facilitating vocational education, internship, apprenticeship with companies. There, I firmly believe budget should have done much more than was done. So I will stop here and will be happy to take questions, respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this presentation. Thank you once again. The chat box is flooded with number of questions. So the first question is related to taxing the rich. Why there is no provision of wealth tax on super rich by Vikram Singh?
Abra, who do you want to address this question?
I I mean,
do you want me to address this issue?
I feel that, both of you should kind of decide on this. I mean, whatever
Okay,
is
I will
comfortable.
respond. I can respond. I'm happy to respond to
Yeah.
this question. Maybe you can read out the 2-3 questions, maybe 3-4 questions, and Professor Bhanumurthy can take some and I can take some. So let's take you read out.
Okay, so the next question is by Hardik, and he says that, as you explained about the rising debt to GDP, which might prove problematic in medium term, economists like Arvind Subramaniam have been arguing for leaving it and instead target primary deficit. What is your take on this, and what are the merits and demerits of it?
Well, I think
Professor Bhanumurthy can take that question.
Yeah.
So you can read out 2 more questions, one for each of us.
Okay, so one more question. If there is no heavy import duties on goods, how can we promote the local products and make India Atmanirbhar?
Okay, I'll take this question, no problem.
Okay, and then we have a question on healthcare. Don't you think that this budget has overlooked rural distress and healthcare?
I will take this.
Okay. And this question, the last question, is specifically to Professor Ram Singh. Can we more in addressing the concern raised by Professor Ram Singh by having higher fiscal deficit? So he's talking about the higher fiscal deficit.
That Ram can answer.
What about higher fiscal deficit? Whether it should, there is a case for higher fiscal deficit, or
no? I think
the question is not specific, but I could make out that
let me explain the question.
Yeah.
I think Ram has said that there is a space for higher fiscal deficit, so I think he cannot answer. I will answer.
You answer, but I have okay, so we both can express our views on it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ram. Go ahead.
Okay, so let me start with wealth tax. When we look at the data, reports by Global Inequality Group or different, Oxfam or other groups, every year reports come out and showing that number of billionaires has increased. Inequalities also have increased. Inequality is of a serious concern in any society. But as people who teach economics, we also should keep in mind. So inequality is so at times we reduce it to a number, Gini coefficient or other such number. These numbers or such statements present only partial picture. It is possible for a society that everybody becomes better off, yet inequality increase. So when we ask, whenever we are told that inequalities have increased, simultaneously we have to ask what is happening to welfare of our masses, our poor, our villagers. Then we will get the complete picture. So, but one of the implications of inequality is that people think of taxing rich. And I'm all for taxing rich. I think, unlike mainstream economists, I feel that Indian rich are not taxed enough. Even though our on record, on papers, our tax regime is progressive. You have 30% income tax at top level and combined with several cesses. And as a result, it is projected as a progressive taxation. But if you look at the effective tax paid by wealthy Indians, then it is not progressive. Well, I'm making this statement based on some research that I'm yet to publish, but hopefully I will put that out shortly in next 1 month or 2. So there is a case for taxing Indian wealthy more than they are being taxed at the moment. However, when it comes to wealth tax, we have to be careful. Just because we want to tax somebody doesn't mean that it's not a simple bland tool that we can throw at somebody and get what we want. When you think of wealth tax, what form of wealth you are thinking? We have to answer questions like this. Just you may have inherited some house, that may be located in the middle of city, but neither your parents nor you may be rich enough to pay tax on that house, even though house could be worth of several crores. So we have to wonder, we have to keep in mind complexities like this. We also have to keep in mind that most dominant form of wealth for Indians, for 99% of Indians, dominant form of wealth is real estate. And real estate, half of real estate is, at least half, is residential property. So when we say that we want to go for wealth tax, we have to ask a question, do we want to tax people because they own houses and they own expensive houses? Some of it is not their fault, nor they can monetize it whenever they want. Having said that, I think there's a case for thinking about wealth tax seriously and exploring possibility of wealth tax at the very top, specifically either focusing on wealth in the form of equity or in the form of corporate profits that do not get distributed as dividend profits. So there, I think there's a case for thinking, but I will hold my horses, so to speak, before I take a clear stand on this. But I agree with the statement that Indian wealthy are not taxed enough. We need to tax them, but we need to think how to do that. As to the other question on healthcare, whether the budget has neglected healthcare and also signs of rural distress. To be fair to the budget and the finance minister, notice I mentioned that Nal Se Jal and PM Awas Yojana. These schemes will primarily benefit rural areas. So the budget also made promise that several lakh, I think around 3 lakh crore of payment will be made through MSPs. Combine that with PM Kisan. If you take all these points in together, then it will not be fair that they have ignored rural distress. It's just that there's a case for doing more. Similarly, on the health front, ideally, I would want any government to spend on health and education much more than we have ever done. There's a case for doing that. But then it's a fixed pie. When we cut bigger slice for infrastructure, a smaller size slice will be available for other things. And here I relate this issue with the higher fiscal deficit. You say, in principle, you can expand the size of a budget pie by increasing fiscal deficit, and still, then one has to wonder whether the split between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure of increased fiscal deficit. Even if we take lenient view that just because capital expenditure is high, so there'll be crowding in of private investment. In normal time, it can be true. When our savings are, let's say, when private household savings are around 12%, 10 to 12%, 14% of GDP, then maybe 6-7% of fiscal deficit. 6-7% of fiscal deficit bring something from fiscal deficits from states. So maybe after center has borrowed from public or financial institutions, there'll be some private savings left for private entities to invest. But when your saving rate itself is down, then high fiscal deficit, even if it's going to be primarily used for capital expenditure, will not necessarily crowd in investment, because you need those investments to be funded, and those savings, one dominant form of the investment is private savings, and today private savings are low. Keeping that in mind, the scope for expanding fiscal deficit is also restricted. So that's all from my side. in this round.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me try. I think on the wealth tax, Ram has already elaborated in detail. So, I think we need to really remember in terms of the taxation, one of the important ingredient of good tax system is that, there should be some kind of a stability and predictability in terms of the rates as well as the slabs that we have. And it's true that all the current slabs have been fixed in 1997 during the dream budget that was presented. There is a need to relook at that whole slabs as well as rates. I think broadly the profession agrees that there is a need to really relook at it. But as we keep talking about these are unprecedented times, and I think there is a need for unprecedented policy intervention as well. So there was a case for having introduction of some kind of a surcharge because right now the central government has been a first line of defense in terms of looking at the kind of unprecedented situation that we have. So they need to generate more resources, and anybody wants to really look at how we tax the rich as well as other income sources, maybe they need to look at recent interview by Dr. C. Rangarajan, where he brings out a couple of issues which I think we need to really look at. So the dividend distribution tax, which is I think right now taxed at 16%. So even if somebody is making a lot of money through the stock market, and they are actually paying much less than what other income sources are paying. So I think there are some sources, there are some areas where the income tax need to really relook. But the wealth tax, I think, in principle, I don't think there is anybody say that there's no for wealth tax or inherent tax that we talk about. But unfortunately, we really don't have the documentation for assessment of what is the wealth. In fact, until recently, we didn't know who owns the land, right? At least right now, there are some parts where we started taking these land records. So in that sense, we do have some kind of information on the rural area, but I think in the urban and the real estate, our information set is very, very limited. So in that sense, I think any introduction of tax on those kind of assets will only result in more leakages in the tax system. The classic example is the way the agriculture, the exemption to the agriculture income, right? In fact, that is one thing that we should start looking at, how to tax the agriculture incomes. Even some industry is escaping through the agriculture income sources. So I think if we can manage to improve the compliance, I think we should be in a much better position. So I think the point somebody is asking is basically how to increase the tax GDP ratio in the economy, which has been stagnant for a long time. I think that's certainly a very valid question, and I'm sure there are a lot of efforts have been going in terms of increasing the compliance and increasing the tax to GDP ratio. So with regard to public debt and Arvind Subramanian's argument, I think I'm not talking really different from what Arvind Subramanian is saying. In fact, what he's trying to say is that you don't focus on the fiscal deficit or the revenue deficit because they think that these kind of concepts are not available in the IMF literature. So he was trying to push this concept of primary deficit. And in fact, there was a nice discussion in the FRBM review committee chaired by Dr. N.K. Singh. And you will see that there are dissent notes by Arvind Subramanian, and there is also counter notes by Sumit Bose and others. So, and in fact, he also argues that at the end, if you want to really focus on the public debt to GDP ratio, you need to run a very small primary surplus in the primary even in the primary deficit. So you need to run a primary surplus so that in the long run you can bring down the public debt to GDP ratio at a stable and sustainable level that we talk about. So they're not very different. I think he was only trying to say that you net out the interest payments and you speak about the primary deficit, which will be useful for consumption purpose or the investment purpose. The third component is the interest payment. I think that's what he's saying. You need to net out that. I am saying that you net out the disinvestment. So everybody can have different views on how to look at the fiscal deficit in the long run. And I think there's one question on that, if there are no heavy import duties on goods, how can we promote the local products and make India Atmanirbhar? I think there is a confusion regarding what is meant by Atmanirbhar, right? If you really translate from Hindi to English, maybe it becomes something different from what you understand in the Hindi language. My feeling is, even the Prime Minister, when he said about the Atmanirbhar Bharat, I don't think government or the Prime Minister saying that you need to go for import substitution policy. I think what they were arguing is that you need to make in India for the world. I think that seems to be the mantra. So in that kind of a situation, if you don't produce commodities at a very competitive price, I don't think you'll have any demand for the commodity that you produce. I mean, the way trade happens, we all know, right, how it happens. Why some countries do better compared to other countries in terms of trade is because of their difference in the productivity and the efficiency levels. We need to keep in mind that we are not going to produce only given goods in this country, because given goods, it doesn't matter what is the cost, what is the price, but we need to really produce goods that are consumed or utilized on a day-to-day basis. And for that, we need to be very, very competitive. And only area where we can become competitive is on the prices side. So if we can become price competitive, in fact, this is where the work of our late friend Deb Kusumda's work comes in, where he studies showed that the import content on the Indian manufacturing sector over a period of time has actually increased, and that led to increased competitiveness of our Indian commodities in the international market. So why in the service sector India is already competitive, right? Because we are very, it may be cost effective, but we are also, our services are much better than other countries. But when it comes to manufacturing sector, if we want to really compete, I think we need to compete mostly on the price side. And for that, we need to see that the cost of production is should be coming down in the long run. And for that, tax-free, import duty-free capital goods becomes a very, very important ingredient in the market. What are the other questions? The rural distress, I think, more than this is more of a journalistic, in my view, this question. In fact, this year, in my view, I think rural is doing extremely well. Whether you take at the macroeconomy level, the NSO is actually projecting agriculture GDP of 3.9%. So in my view, it is less, very, very conservative. When the final number comes, it cannot be anywhere less than 4.5% in the agriculture sector. Okay, and I can tell you there are so many indicators to say that there is less rural distress in the current year compared to the last year. And the more concern for us is on the urban distress right now. It is not on the rural distress. And if you look at many of the programs, by the way, somebody asked, why can't we run so much of fiscal deficit? But I think we need to have something called absorptive capacity. I think we need to understand whether the economy has absorptive capacity to really absorb the 35% that I'm telling about. 35% of the fiscal deficit over a period of 3 years. Is the economy has that kind of absorptive capacity? I'll give you one simple example. Even in the current year, that is 21-22, despite so much of calls for larger fiscal deficit, for the first time in the 9 months of the current year, our fiscal deficit is less than 50% of the annual budget. Okay, you look at the CGA website. By the way, I just want to tell the students here, some of the numbers in the Indian economy is so sacrosanct, and among them is fiscal data that we get from the CGA website. So the CGA website is saying for April-December, our fiscal deficit is just less than 50% of the annual budget. Okay, so that clearly shows what is the absorptive capacity of the Indian economy, whether in terms of the capital expenditure or in terms of the social sector expenditure. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And I do believe that assessing all these expenditures, how we are spending. Imagine the next 3 months, that is January to March, you need to borrow 50% of the fiscal deficit over and above what are the expenditure that we need to do. So I think, does economy can observe the 50% fiscal deficit in just 3 months? I think that I think we need to keep in mind. These are all not my number. This is there on the website. I think anybody can really have a look at those numbers. Anything else? Did I miss any other question?
No, yeah.
Yeah.
So there are 4 more questions. So the first question is related to environment. It says that, sir, don't you think schemes like Nal Se Jal are going to prove detrimental in the long run as far as sustainability of natural resources is concerned? The other is related to education, and it says that given the public universities are too less in number, there are almost no new additions to colleges and are too slow to modernize according to new technology trends. Do you think appropriate skilling can be done without allowing private and foreign universities at a big scale in India? The third is related to privatization, and it says that privatization and disinvestment were the biggest themes of the last year budget. So what about this year? Are they completely? And this raises is the question she's asking, that this raises a question on the government strategy. The last question is related to crypto, and it says that according to the budget, the NFTs will be charged 30% on profit. Is it a good strategy to tackle with the crypto in India, and what will be the consequences in the future?
I can take the last 2 questions, maybe first 2 questions. Ram, you would like to try?
Yeah.
Want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. What were the first 2? One is Nal Se Jal, and whether it's going to be degrading of natural resources.
Yeah, in the long run.
And the second question is
about the appropriate skilling that can be done without allowing.
And private universities and skilling.
Yeah.
On face of it, I struggle to see how Nal Se Jal scheme will be detrimental to environment and our ecology. If anything, I would be tempted to think otherwise. That at the moment, we tend to overexploit our natural resources, including our water sources. Overexploitation is clearly detrimental to ecology and environment. If we streamline the utilization process, harvesting of these natural resources, Nal Se Jal scheme is it's something that in principle can reduce wastage of water. Now, of course, if you are going to provide water free of cost at all, then of course one can't hope that people will use water responsibly. But if there are nominal charges introduced, then it can have great effect in terms of shaping our incentives. Look at experiment done by Delhi as a state with respect to power consumption. People who were otherwise tend to be generous with power consumption, though they were paying for power. Even those people have been made to think twice, how much power they want to consume. Because the incentive design was so beautiful. If you consume electricity within 200 units, then you pay nothing. And then all of a sudden your bill jumps if you consume 1 more unit. Schemes like this can make us responsible user of water services also. So it will depend on the associated incentives. But in principle, I think it can reduce the wastage of water resources. And water is something, oil we have been able to import in the past, and in future, hopefully we are reducing our dependence on oil, petroleum products. But it will be difficult to import water, and it will be shameful to import water. So we have to, and we are, the water shortage faced by us is seriously, it's alarming. So scheme, we need to harvest nurture our water sources and utilize them responsibly. I think this scheme has a potential with suitable combined with price mechanism. As to the skilling, skilling is something, even though when you impart skill to one person and it's a private good, there's a competition, it's not standard public good, the way we define public good. But given the nature of the problem, intensity of the problem and scale of the problem, if private universities could solve this problem, they would have already come up. We have most of our universities are private universities. Today, number of private universities, private colleges in engineering, in medical sciences, in higher education is much larger than publicly funded, government funded, and combining central universities, central funded, government funded colleges, and state universities. So number of private universities and private colleges is larger than government universities, central and state combined. So if private universities could take care of this problem, they would have already started doing that. And there is very little investment being done by private universities, private colleges in imparting quality. There are reasons why they are not doing that. But point I want to make is that here the state, the government has to make a start. The government has to pump in money and resources, human resources, to address this problem. So its benefit will be, it has externality. It will have externality in terms of enhanced productivity of our workforce, enhanced productivity of our output. And that in turn will have bearing on competitiveness of our exports. So our exports, we come as a dampener. That part of the reason, one important factor is the low productivity of our workforce. It has other, it's important from other macroeconomic viewpoint also. Think of, if you are, think of yourself as someone who is launching an industry, an industrial plant. And when you know that the quality of labor force is low, the skill set is poor, what will you do? You will think of, you will invest less, and conditional on you making investment, you will think of labor replacing technology. So a low skill set also incentivizes our investors to invest in labor replacing technology, labor saving technology. If we improve quality of skill set of our workforce, then it will also create incentives for not adopting labor saving technology. And to that extent, it will generate, what they call virtuous cycle, where there will be more employment, more productivity, more income, and more consumption. So the issue of the skill set, importance of the vocational education, internship, is not as much appreciated as it should be. It has serious macroeconomic implications which are not generally talked about. So I will stop here. I will let Professor Banamurthy speak on.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. So the privatization, disinvestment this strategy. So I've been talking about this for some time now. That's what I said, that disinvestment should not be part of fiscal deficit calculations, for a simple reason that we should not limit the disinvestment process to April-March calendar. Okay, the fiscal policy, the budget is basically April-March calendar. But I think when it comes to disinvestment, it should not be limited to April-March calendar. And similarly, it goes for the privatization as well. And if you look at, in fact, we have, I don't think it is limited to budget. In fact, last year, there is a medium-term plan of, generating 6 lakh crore under the national monetization pipeline. And I don't think that is tied up with this April-March calendar. So I think going forward, you can always target high, but if you can even achieve that 50% or 60% of the target, I think that is still a very, very significant success. And in fact, we all should be happy that Air India has been privatized. I know we have been struggling for so long, and even the LIC, who thought that LIC IPO can be done within this financial year. Now, if you look at going by the media reports, I think the IPO should be happening anytime this month itself. Everybody thought it will be somewhere in the month of March, but the way it looks like, I think we are somewhere very close in terms of seeing the disinvestment in the LIC. So I think there are hits and misses when it comes to privatization and disinvestment, because it has its own issues. It is not as easy as just allocating resources, but I think here there's so many issues come in, and it's not a very, very easy task. So I think to that extent, I would think that it should not be limited to the financial year. So regarding this 30% tax, I think right now this seems to be like a stopgap policy intervention, because many youngsters already started investing in crypto. On a lighter vein, Ram, I was telling in one of the panel discussions, so one major reason why there is a private consumption decline is because all these youngsters who start investing their pocket money in that crypto market, I think that seems to be too big. I mean, the kind of numbers we get in the crypto market is very big. So there may be a small investor, but I think if we add it up, it would be huge investment that seems to be happening in the crypto market. So right now it is a black box, and the youngsters, those who are here, I urge all of them to really follow the views of the RBI. RBI is the biggest defense for this country, so you go with RBI's views. And I think whatever I understand from the RBI, they say that please don't get into this crypto market, because, and this 30% is still a stopgap arrangement. In fact, the draft report on the digital currency or the cryptocurrency was very clearly mentioning that to ban and in the country. So I think even to ban, you don't have many instruments. I think that's where the government seems to be struggling. So North Block is confused. RBI is very clear. So I would say that please go with the RBI view and don't even think about whether it's a 30% or this coin, that coin, and all those things. So with that caution, let me end, and I would like to thank all of you for patiently listening to us. And I also need to leave for another meeting, okay, if it is okay with all of you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ram Singh and Professor Bhanumurthy. I would like to invite Dr. Apala Naidu for the vote of thanks now.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Appara. A very good evening to one and all. I feel honored and privileged to have asked the vote of thanks in this occasion. I, Dr. Appala Naidu, behalf of Department of Economics and IQAC Atmaram Sanatan Dharma College, University of Delhi, and my own behalf of take this opportunity to put all my gratitude in fruitful words and extend my very heartiest vote of thanks to all the dignitaries in this panel discussion on budget 2022-23. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Honorable Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy sir. It gives enlightening and knowledgeable presentation. This presentation is about presentation about the transformation of FRBM Act and capital expenditure to the revenue expenditure, and maintain the trajectory of the hoping to in future trends, and also inflationary expectations, what we are expecting due to the COVID-19 crisis and since 2019. So that is also a point is highlighted about his presentation. And another most important is housing schemes, whatever it is announced by the central government and the state government. It is also kind of housing for all to providing kind of housing. And also highlighted some concern about manufacturing sector and all the budgetaries, particularly disinvestment in the part of the in this fiscal visit, and other concern. It is his presentation. And Professor Ram Singh sir, I would like to gratitude to Professor Ram Singh sir, his blessings and his views, perspectives on this panel discussion, and his presentation about the basic concern about possible cuts in CSS and subsidies particularly empowerment with the states and unemployment, education and health, and some inequalities in the state. And I also wish to express my gratitude our principal, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, and providing encouragement support to us and opportunity to organize this wonderful panel discussion today. And also extend my big thanks to our convener, IPUSC, Dr. Vinita Thuli, for always being there for us, giving constant support. I also wish to our teacher in charge, Department of Economics, Richa Suri, always being there for us, encouragement. And no program can be successful until support for our technical team, Ravindra Pant. And finally, a heartfelt thanks to all the participants for their active participation in this panel discussion. We are grateful to all the participants. It's a great occasion, and thanks to one and all present over here. Thank you, sir, giving for us time to your busy schedule. Thank you very much, Professor Bhanumurthy sir and Professor Ram Singh sir.
Sure, it was pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ram Singh. Thank you, Professor Bhanu. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye.